The hook. On the planet Vela, the once thriving cities now stood in silence. Streets that had been full of life were now deserted, except for the haunting sounds of distant coughing and the occasional wail of grief. The Velan people, a proud and advanced alien race, were on the brink of extinction. A mysterious plague had swept through their population, sparing no one. Their brightest minds had tried everything, but nothing worked. Hope was fading. In the grand chamber of the Velan Council, the air was thick with despair. Council members argued in hushed, panicked tones. Their leader, Elder Tavak, slammed his staff against the floor to silence the room. "Our people are dying," he bellowed. "We cannot waste time debating. We must act." Before anyone could respond, the heavy doors of the chamber creaked open. Every head turned as a lone figure entered. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a worn jacket that marked him as an outsider. His face was human, pale compared to the emerald-skinned Valens, and his expression was determined. This was Dr. Ethan Cole, the only human brave enough to answer their desperate call for help. "Who dares enter uninvited?" Tavak demanded, narrowing his eyes at the human. Ethan stepped forward, his boots echoing in the silent chamber. "I'm Dr. Ethan Cole, and I've come to save your people." The council erupted in disbelief. Whispers filled the room. "A human? Here? Does he not know that human blood is poison to us? This is madness." Elder Tavak raised his hand to quiet the murmurs. His piercing gaze focused on Ethan. "You claim to have a solution, human, but your kind's biology is incompatible with ours. Your blood would kill us faster than the plague." Ethan didn't flinch. Instead, he placed a small vial of crimson liquid on the table before him. "You think my blood is poison because of ancient myths, but I studied your biology, and I believe it holds the key to a cure." Laughter broke out among some council members. One, a younger Velan named Draken, sneered. "Arrogant human, you think you can fix what our greatest minds cannot." Ethan's voice was calm but firm. "Your greatest minds don't have my perspective. I've seen similar diseases before, and I've cured them. I'm not asking for your trust, just your permission to try." The council fell silent again, unsure how to respond. Finally, Elder Tavak spoke. "Even if we were to allow it, how could we risk the lives of our people? You are an unknown, and failure could doom us all." Before Ethan could reply, the doors burst open once more. A frantic mother rushed in, carrying a limp child in her arms. The boy's skin was pale, his breathing shallow. "Please," the mother cried, tears streaming down her face. "My son, he doesn't have much time left. Let the human try. He's our only hope." The council froze. All eyes turned to Ethan. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, but he didn't hesitate. He knelt beside the boy, quickly assessing his condition. The child's veins were darkened, a clear sign of the plague's progression. "I can help him," Ethan said, looking up at the council, "but only if you let me." Tavak hesitated, his face a mix of fear and doubt. The room waited in tense silence as the elder made his decision. Finally, he gave a slow nod. "You may try, human. But understand this. If you fail, there will be no second chances." Ethan nodded and began working immediately. He reached into his medical kit, pulling out a syringe and a small vial filled with a serum he had created during his journey to Vela. The serum was experimental, untested, but it was the only hope. As Ethan prepared the injection, the council watched with bated breath. Whispers filled the chamber again. "He's going to kill the boy. Or maybe, just maybe." Ethan's hands were steady as he inserted the needle into the boy's arm. The mother gasped, holding her breath. For a moment, nothing happened. The boy lay still, his chest barely rising and falling. Then suddenly, his breathing grew stronger. His eyes fluttered open, and a faint color returned to his cheeks. The mother sobbed in relief, cradling her child tightly. The council erupted in chaos. Some members cheered, while others shouted in disbelief. Elder Tavak slammed his staff again, silencing the room. His eyes locked on Ethan. "You have given us a glimmer of hope, human. But one success is not enough. If you wish to save our people, you will have to prove this cure works on a larger scale." Ethan rose to his feet, meeting Tavak's gaze with determination. "Then let me prove it. I'll save your people, or I'll die trying." The elder nodded slowly, his expression grim. "So be it. But know this, human. If you fail, it won't just be the plague that destroys you. It will be us." Ethan didn't respond. He simply turned and walked toward the mother and child, his mind already racing with plans. Time was running out, and the fate of an entire race rested on his shoulders. As he stepped out of the chamber, the camera panned to the worried faces of the Valen Council, leaving the audience with one burning question. Could a human really save an entire alien race? The resistance. The chamber fell silent after Ethan's bold declaration. Though the child's miraculous recovery gave the Valens a shred of hope, skepticism and fear still clung to the air like a heavy fog. Ethan knew he was walking on thin ice. One mistake, and the Council's fragile trust would shatter. As Ethan returned to his makeshift laboratory, located in an abandoned medical facility, his mind raced with calculations and theories. He had collected samples of the plague's pathogen earlier and was piecing together its structure. The breakthrough with the child hinted that his blood serum might be a key, but scaling it to treat an entire population was a monumental challenge. The facility's doors creaked open, and Yalora, a young and brilliant Valen scientist, entered hesitantly. Her eyes, a striking violet hue, studied Ethan with a mix of curiosity and doubt. "You're braver than I expected, human," she said, breaking the silence. "But bravery doesn't guarantee success." Ethan looked up from his workstation, his eyes tired but focused. "And doubt doesn't guarantee failure. If you're here to question me, get in line. If you're here to help, grab some gloves." Yalora hesitated, then stepped forward. "I've reviewed the results from the child. Your serum neutralized the pathogen's core proteins, something no Valen treatment has achieved. But the plague is mutating, faster than we anticipated. That's why I need help," Ethan admitted. "I got the basics, but I need someone who understands Valen biology inside out. I'm guessing that's you." Yalora's lips twitched in what might have been the beginnings of a smile. "Perhaps, but don't expect me to trust you completely. My people have every reason to fear humans." Ethan didn't look up. "Trust isn't my priority right now. Saving lives is." A growing divide. While Ethan and Yalora worked tirelessly in the lab, the Valen Council was far from unified. A heated debate erupted among the members. Some, like Elder Tavak, believed the human deserved a chance. Others, led by the aggressive and mistrustful Drekan, saw Ethan as a dangerous outsider. Drekan slammed his fist on the council table. "This human is meddling with forces he doesn't understand. What if his cure backfires? What if it kills more of our people?" Tavak responded with a calm yet firm tone. "And what if it saves them? Would you prefer to watch our people perish, doing nothing, out of fear?" Drekan sneered. "I'd prefer not to gamble with the lives of our future generations." The council was split. To many, Ethan was a symbol of hope. To others, he was an existential threat. The debate ended with a tense stalemate, leaving the human's fate hanging in the balance. Breakthroughs and setbacks. Back in the lab, Ethan and Yalora made significant progress. Using advanced equipment and Valen biological data, they identified the plague's core mechanism, a protein that bonded to Valen blood cells, destroying them. Ethan's serum disrupted this bond, but the pathogen was adapting rapidly. "This isn't just a plague," Yalora said, staring at the data on the screen. "It's almost intelligent. It's as if it's fighting back." Ethan frowned. "Pathogens don't think, but they evolve. If we're going to win this, we need to stay ahead of it." Their collaboration was not without tension. Yalora often questioned Ethan's methods, and he sometimes struggled to explain human science in ways she could understand. But despite their differences, a mutual respect began to grow. Late one night, as they worked side by side, Yalora broke the silence. "Why are you doing this, human? You could have stayed on your world, safe and comfortable. Why risk everything for a species you don't even know?" Ethan paused, the weight of her question sinking in. "Because I've seen too much death already. Back on Earth, I was a doctor during the Martian epidemic. I lost more patients than I saved. When I heard your distress signal, I couldn't just ignore it. If I can save even one life here, it's worth it." Yalora studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You're a strange one, human. Perhaps not all humans are as terrible as the stories say." Sabotage and distrust. As progress continued, tension outside the lab escalated. Draken and his faction grew increasingly vocal, accusing Ethan of spreading the plague rather than curing it. One night, while Ethan and Yalora were working, an explosion rocked the facility. Alarms blared, and smoke filled the air. Ethan grabbed a fire extinguisher and raced toward the source of the blast. He found a storage room engulfed in flames, along with several shattered vials of the serum. "It's sabotage," Yalora shouted, coughing through the smoke. "Someone doesn't want you to succeed." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Then we'll have to work twice as hard." The sabotage was a devastating blow. Valuable samples were lost, and their progress was delayed. But instead of breaking their resolve, it strengthened their determination. Yalora vowed to root out the saboteurs, while Ethan doubled down on his research. The tide turns. Amidst the chaos, a critical discovery was made. Yalora analyzed the remains of the destroyed vials and realized that the serum could be synthesized using a specific enzyme found in Valen plants. This meant they could produce larger quantities without relying solely on Ethan's blood. "This changes everything," Ethan said, his eyes lighting up with hope. "We can treat more people, faster." But there was no time to celebrate. Draken's faction was growing more aggressive, rallying citizens against Ethan. They staged protests outside the lab, chanting, "Humans bring death," and demanding his removal. Ethan stepped outside to address the crowd, flanked by Yalora and a handful of supporters. "I understand your fear," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But fear won't save your people. Science will. Let me finish what I started, and I promise you, I'll either find a cure or die trying." His words resonated with some, but others remained unconvinced. The crowd dispersed, but the tension lingered. Cliffhanger. That night, as Ethan and Yalora prepared the first large batch of the serum, the lab's security system detected an intruder. Ethan grabbed a makeshift weapon, a metal rod, and motioned for Yalora to stay back. They found a shadowy figure attempting to steal the remaining samples. Ethan confronted the intruder, who turned out to be one of Draken's followers. A struggle ensued, and Ethan managed to subdue the saboteur. But not before a crucial piece of equipment was damaged. As the intruder was taken away, Ethan slumped against the wall, exhausted and battered. Yalora knelt beside him. "They won't stop, Ethan. They'll do everything they can to see you fail. Then we'll just have to work faster," Ethan said, determination burning in his eyes. "Because failure isn't an option." The camera pans to the damaged equipment, leaving the audience wondering, can Ethan overcome the growing resistance in time to save the Valens? The first trial. The dim glow of the lab's monitors illuminated Ethan's determined face as he prepared for his first large-scale test. The child's recovery had been a beacon of hope, but treating one patient was vastly different from curing an entire species. With Yalora's help, he had synthesized enough of the modified serum for a controlled trial on a group of critical patients. Across the lab, Yalora was reviewing patient data. "We've selected 5 subjects," she said, her voice steady but tinged with anxiety. "These are some of the most advanced cases. If the serum works on them, it could work on anyone." Ethan nodded, carefully loading the serum into vials. No pressure, right? Yolora managed a small smile. No pressure. The patients were brought into the facility under heavy guard. Each one was in dire condition. Pale, weak, and barely able to stand. Their families watched from a distance, their faces a mix of fear and hope. Among them was the mother of the child Ethan had saved. She stood silently, clutching her son close, her eyes locked on Ethan. The first patient, an elderly Valen male named Herrick, was wheeled into the treatment room. His breathing was labored, and his emerald skin had taken on a sickly gray hue. Ethan approached him cautiously, syringe in hand. "Herrick," Ethan said softly, kneeling beside the bed. "I need you to trust me. This serum might be the only thing that can save you." Herrick's eyes fluttered open, and he gave a faint nod. "Do what you must." The room was silent as Ethan administered the serum. Every eye was on Herrick, and the tension was palpable. For a few agonizing moments, nothing happened. Then, Herrick's body convulsed violently. Monitors beeped wildly as his heart rate spiked. "Ethan," Yolora shouted, rushing to stabilize the patient. "He's going into shock." Ethan worked quickly, adjusting Herrick's oxygen supply and administering a secondary injection to counteract the reaction. Minutes felt like hours as they fought to keep him alive. Finally, Herrick's breathing stabilized, and the room let out a collective sigh of relief. "Is this normal?" a council observer asked, his voice trembling. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow. It's not uncommon for the body to react strongly to a foreign serum, but he's stabilizing, which is a good sign. As Herrick's condition improved, Ethan moved on to the next patient, a young woman named Lyra. Her reaction was less severe, and within minutes, her vital signs showed significant improvement. One by one, the patients received the serum, and the results were promising. The room buzzed with cautious optimism, a ripple of hope. Word of the successful trials spread quickly. Families of other patients gathered outside the lab, pleading for their loved ones to be treated. Yolora worked tirelessly to calm the crowd, while Ethan focused on refining the serum for mass production. Inside the lab, Herrick had regained enough strength to sit up. He looked at Ethan with tears in his eyes. "You've given me my life back, human. I don't know how to thank you." Ethan smiled faintly. "Seeing you alive is thanks enough." But not everyone shared Herrick's gratitude. Outside the lab, Dracon's faction grew increasingly vocal. They accused Ethan of experimenting on the Valen people, claiming his methods were dangerous and untested. "You're playing God with our lives," Dracon shouted during a council meeting. "How long before his so-called cure turns into another plague?" Tavak stood firm. "Ethan's results speak for themselves. If you have an alternative, Dracon, we're listening." Dracon had no answer, but his glare spoke volumes. The conflict was far from over. An unseen threat. As Ethan and Yolora worked to scale up production, strange things began happening. Equipment malfunctioned without explanation, supplies went missing, and data was erased. It became clear that someone was sabotaging their efforts. Late one night, as Ethan was reviewing patient data, he heard a faint noise from the storage room. Grabbing a flashlight, he crept down the dimly lit hallway. The door to the storage room was ajar, and inside, he found a shadowy figure tampering with the serum supplies. "Hey!" Ethan shouted, startling the intruder. The figure turned and bolted, but Ethan gave chase. The pursuit led him through the labyrinthine corridors of the facility, ending in the courtyard. Ethan tackled the saboteur, pinning them to the ground. To his shock, it was a young Valen, barely more than a teenager. "Why are you doing this?" Ethan demanded, his voice filled with both anger and confusion. The boy glared at him. "You're a human. My father died because of your kind. You don't belong here." Ethan's grip tightened for a moment. Then he released the boy and stood up. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm here to help. If you want to blame someone for your father's death, fine. But don't take it out on the people I'm trying to save." The boy hesitated, his expression softening. Before he could respond, Yalor arrived with security. The boy was taken into custody, but the incident left Ethan shaken. A race against time. The sabotage only intensified Ethan's resolve. With Yalora's help, he developed a new method to synthesize the serum more efficiently. The process involved extracting enzymes from a rare Valen plant, which sped up production significantly. As they prepared to distribute the first large batch of the serum, Ethan addressed the gathered crowd. "I know some of you still don't trust me. I don't blame you. But this isn't about me. It's about saving lives. If we don't act now, more people will die. Let me do what I came here to do." The crowd was silent for a moment. Then a voice called out. It was Herrick. "He saved me. He can save you too." The ripple of support grew, and soon, the majority of the crowd was cheering. Even some council members who had been skeptical began to soften. Escalation. The next phase of Ethan's mission came with higher stakes and mounting challenges. The plague had mutated again, becoming faster and more aggressive. Patients who had shown improvement began to relapse, and new cases surged across Vela. The initial optimism was quickly being overshadowed by panic. Ethan stood in the lab, staring at the genetic data projected on a holographic screen. The pathogen's structure now resembled a twisting labyrinth, adapting to every countermeasure. Yalora stood beside him, her hands clenched into fists. "This isn't a natural mutation," she said, her voice trembling. "It's too precise, too deliberate." Ethan glanced at her. "You're saying it's engineered?" Yalora nodded. "I suspected it from the beginning, but now I'm certain. Someone created this plague, and they didn't intend for us to survive." The weight of her words sank in. This wasn't just a medical crisis. It was an act of biological warfare. The race to adapt. Ethan and Yalora worked tirelessly to develop a new version of the serum. The clock was ticking, and every moment counted. The facility buzzed with activity as more Valens volunteered to assist, inspired by Ethan's determination. Despite their efforts, the plague continued to outpace them. Ethan slammed a fist against the lab table, frustration etched across his face. "It's like fighting a ghost. Every time we get close, it shifts." Yalora placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure it out. We have to." Their breakthrough came late one night. Yalora discovered a protein unique to the plague that acted as its anchor, allowing it to adapt rapidly. If they could disrupt this protein, they could stop the mutation process. "This is it," Ethan said, his eyes lighting up. "If we target this, we can stop it in its tracks." The new serum was created in record time, but testing it was another challenge. With resources stretched thin and more patients dying by the hour, they had no room for error. Mounting tensions. Meanwhile, outside the lab, tensions reached a boiling point. Dricken's faction was gaining ground, fueled by fear and distrust. They spread rumors that the new serum was dangerous, and that Ethan's efforts were a human conspiracy to weaken the Valen race. During a council meeting, Dricken slammed his hand on the table, his voice booming. "This human has done nothing but bring chaos to our people. We were surviving before he came. Now we're on the brink of collapse." Tavak stood, his voice calm but resolute. "And what do you propose, Dricken?" "That we send him away and let the plague consume us. Ethan has done more for our people in weeks than we've done in months." The debate raged on, dividing the council further. Outside, protests erupted near the lab. Crowds of Valens chanted slogans, some calling for Ethan's expulsion, others demanding the serum. The once united race was fracturing under the strain. Sabotage strikes again. Amidst the chaos, the saboteurs struck once more. This time, they targeted the facility's power supply, plunging the lab into darkness. Emergency generators kicked in, but the damage was done. Critical equipment was destroyed, and hours of data were lost. Ethan surveyed the wreckage, his fists clenched. "We're running out of time, and they're tearing us apart from the inside." Yalora's expression was grim. "It's not just sabotage, it's coordinated, Someone doesn't want us to succeed. Ethan's mind raced. If the plague was engineered, it was possible that the saboteurs were connected to whoever created it. But proving that would have to wait. First, they needed to get the lab operational again. A call for unity. With tensions at their peak, Ethan decided to address the Valen people directly. Standing before a makeshift podium outside the lab, he spoke to the gathered crowd, his voice carrying both determination and urgency. "I know many of you don't trust me," he began, his eyes scanning the sea of faces. "I'm an outsider, a human. But I didn't come here to harm you. I came because I believe every life matters, no matter what planet it's from." He gestured toward the lab. "Inside, we're working on a cure. We're close, but we can't do it alone. This isn't just my fight. It's ours. If we don't stand together, this plague will tear us apart." For a moment, the crowd was silent. Then Herrick, the elderly patient Ethan had saved, stepped forward. His voice, though frail, carried conviction. "This human saved my life. If he says he can save more, I believe him." One by one, others began to speak up, sharing stories of how Ethan's serum had given their loved ones a second chance. The tide began to turn, and even some of Drekon's followers started to question their stance. Uncovering the truth. Back in the lab, Yalora made a startling discovery. Using data recovered from the sabotage, she traced the pathogen's origin to a remote laboratory on the outskirts of the city. The facility had been abandoned years ago, but its records suggested it had been repurposed recently. "This is it," Yalora said, showing Ethan the data. "If we can get inside, we might find out who's behind this, and how to stop them." Ethan nodded. "We'll need to move fast. If they know we're coming, they'll destroy the evidence." With Tavak's approval, Ethan and Yalora led a small team to the facility. What they found confirmed their worst fears. The lab was filled with equipment designed to weaponize pathogens, and the plague's genetic blueprint was stored in its database. "It's worse than we thought," Yalora said, her voice trembling. "This wasn't just an attack on Vela. It was meant to spread beyond our planet." Ethan's mind reeled. If the plague was unleashed on other worlds, it could become a galaxy-wide catastrophe. Ethan's sacrifice. The destruction of the hidden laboratory left Ethan and Yalora shaken but resolute. They had barely escaped with their lives, clutching the stolen data that revealed the plague's true origins. It wasn't just an act of biological warfare. It was a deliberate attempt to wipe out the Valen people and destabilize the region. Worse, the data hinted at an even more sinister truth. The plague's creators had anticipated resistance and built fail-safes into its genetic code, making it nearly impossible to eradicate without a specific key enzyme, one that no longer existed in Valen biology. Back at the lab, the data was decrypted, revealing the plague's source: a genetic modification program run by a shadowy interstellar organization. Their ultimate goal was to weaken inferior species across the galaxy, clearing the way for their expansion. The Valens, once a powerful race, had been targeted to test the plague's effectiveness. Ethan leaned against the wall, his face pale. This wasn't just an attack. It was genocide in slow motion. Yalora's violet eyes filled with rage. "We can't let them succeed. But without that enzyme..." Ethan straightened, his jaw set. "We'll make it, or I'll die trying." The missing piece. The data revealed the enzyme's structure, a compound unique to Valen blood centuries ago, before their biology evolved. Without it, the plague's mutation would continue, rendering any cure temporary. Ethan realized that his own blood, similar yet distinct, might serve as a substitute. "It's a long shot," Yalora said, studying the molecular structure on the monitor. "Your blood contains traces of the enzyme, but the concentration is too low." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "Then we'll have to amplify it. What if we use a retrovirus to replicate the enzyme in my blood?" Yalora's eyes widened. "That could work, but it's incredibly dangerous. If the retrovirus mutates, it could destroy your cells instead of enhancing them. Ethan nodded grimly. I'm willing to take that risk. The room fell silent. Yalora stared at him, her expression a mix of admiration and fear. You're risking your life for a species that isn't even yours. Why? Ethan met her gaze. Because it's the right thing to do. And because if we don't stop this here, it won't end with your people. It'll spread to mine. Yalora hesitated, then nodded. If you're doing this, I'm not letting you do it alone. Let's get to work. The experiment. For days, Ethan and Yalora worked around the clock, developing a retrovirus that could enhance the enzyme production in Ethan's blood. The process was grueling, requiring countless tests and adjustments. Ethan volunteered himself as the first test subject, knowing the risks. As Yalora prepared the injection, her hands trembled. This could kill you, Ethan. Are you sure about this? Ethan smiled faintly. I'm sure. Besides, if I don't make it, at least we'll know how to refine it. Yalora bit her lip, then administered the injection. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Ethan's body convulsed violently, his veins burning with the retrovirus's effects. He collapsed onto the table, gasping for air. Stay with me, Yalora shouted, monitoring his vitals. The retrovirus was rewriting his cellular structure, a process that was as dangerous as it was revolutionary. Minutes felt like hours. Ethan's heartbeat slowed, then stabilized. He opened his eyes, his breath ragged. Did it work? Yalora scanned his blood. Her face lit up with hope. The enzyme concentration has increased by 300%. It worked. Ethan smiled weakly. Good. Let's use it. Scaling the cure. With the amplified enzyme, Ethan and Yalora synthesized a new version of the serum. This one was designed to not only neutralize the plague, but also halt its ability to mutate. The process was slow and painstaking, but the results were promising. The first batch of the enhanced serum was administered to critical patients. Within hours, their symptoms began to reverse. The progress was undeniable, and even the most skeptical council members started to believe. We might actually pull this off, Yalora said, her voice filled with cautious optimism. Ethan nodded, but his expression remained serious. This is just the beginning. We need to produce enough serum for the entire population, and fast. Dracon's final gambit. As hope began to spread, Dracon launched one last desperate attack. His faction stormed the lab, accusing Ethan of endangering the Valen race. They demanded the serum be destroyed, claiming it was a human weapon designed to enslave their people. Ethan confronted Dracon in the main hall, his voice calm but firm. I understand your fear, Dracon, but destroying the serum won't save your people. It will doom them. Dracon sneered. And what if you're wrong? What if this cure is just another form of control? Ethan stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. Then let me prove it. Let me finish what I started. If I fail, you can exile me, or worse. But if I succeed, your people will live. The room fell silent. For a moment, it seemed like Dracon would attack. But then, to everyone's surprise, he stepped back. You have one chance, human. Don't waste it. The ultimate test. With Dracon's interference halted, Ethan and Yalora ramped up production of the serum. But Ethan's health began to deteriorate. The retrovirus that had amplified the enzyme was also taking a toll on his body. His immune system was failing, and his energy was fading. You need to rest, Yalora said, her voice filled with concern. You're pushing yourself too hard. Ethan shook his head. I don't have time to rest. If this doesn't work, everything we've done will be for nothing. The final test came when Ethan volunteered to administer the serum to a patient in the most advanced stage of the plague. The patient's organs were failing, and the pathogen had spread to every part of their body. This is it, Ethan said, holding the syringe. If it works on them, it'll work on anyone. He administered the injection and watched anxiously as the patient's vitals fluctuated. For a tense hour, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the patient's breathing improved, and their skin regained its natural emerald hue. It worked, Yolora whispered, tears streaming down her face. It worked. Ethan slumped against the wall, exhaustion overtaking him. Good. Now let's save the rest of them. The turning point. Ethan's body lay still in the medical chamber, monitors quietly beeping as Yolora worked tirelessly by his side. The retrovirus that had amplified his enzyme production was now threatening to kill him. His pale face and shallow breathing were a stark contrast to the determined human who had once promised to save an entire alien race. For the Valens, Ethan's sacrifice had become a symbol of hope. But for Yolora, it was a personal mission to ensure he didn't become a martyr. The serum Ethan had developed was being distributed across Vela, with incredible results. Patients were recovering rapidly, and new cases were brought under control within hours of treatment. For the first time in months, the streets were alive with cautious celebration. But behind the scenes, a storm was brewing. The Council's dilemma. In the grand chamber of the Valen Council, the mood was tense. Elder Tavak addressed the gathered members, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. The serum is working. Thanks to the human, we are seeing the end of this plague. But this is no time for complacency. Draken, now isolated after his faction's failure to disrupt the serum's distribution, sneered from his seat. Complacency. You speak as if this human hasn't brought as much chaos as he has salvation. What happens when the galaxy learns of our weakness? Do we expect them to ignore it? Tavak fixed him with a piercing gaze. What would you have us do, Draken? Reject the cure and let our people perish. Or perhaps you would prefer we turn on the one being who gave us a second chance. Draken's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The council debated furiously, torn between their gratitude toward Ethan and their fear of what his success represented. The revelation that the plague was engineered had sparked paranoia. If such a weapon could be unleashed on the Valens, who was to say it couldn't happen again? Amid the arguments, a messenger burst into the chamber, bowing deeply. Elders, there's news from the humans' lab. The latest batch of serum has been completed, but the human's condition is deteriorating rapidly. He may not survive the night. A hush fell over the room. Even Draken, for all his animosity, seemed momentarily stunned. Tavak rose from his seat. Then we must act swiftly. If this human dies, let it not be said that the Valen people stood idly by. The saboteur revealed. Back at the lab, Yolora reviewed the data they had extracted from the destroyed facility. Something about it gnawed at her, a pattern in the files that seemed familiar. As she cross-referenced the data with the lab's internal systems, her heart sank. The sabotage wasn't just external. It had been aided by someone on the inside. She quickly pulled up the security logs and froze. The saboteur was one of the council aides, a close ally of Draken. The aide had been feeding information to the plague's creators, ensuring that every step forward was met with resistance. Yolora clenched her fists, her mind racing. If the council knew of this betrayal, it could lead to chaos. But if she didn't act, the saboteur might continue to undermine their efforts. And worse, jeopardize Ethan's survival. Summoning the lab's security team, she ordered the aide's immediate arrest. The confrontation was tense, with the saboteur attempting to destroy the remaining data before being subdued. As the security team dragged him away, he spat venomously at Yolora. You think you've won. The galaxy doesn't care about your kind. You're just the first to fall. Yolora watched him go, her resolve hardening. Not if we can help it. Ethan's gamble. As Yolora returned to the lab, she found Ethan awake but barely conscious. His voice was weak, but his eyes still held the fire of determination. Did it work? He asked, his words slurring slightly. Yolora nodded, sitting beside him. The serum is being distributed. Patients are recovering. You've done it, Ethan. He managed a faint smile. Good, Because I'm not sure I've got much left in me. Yalora's throat tightened. Don't say that. We're working on a treatment for you. The retrovirus. Ethan interrupted her, his hand weakly reaching for hers. Yalora, if this is it for me, I need you to promise something. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. Anything. Make sure they know, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Make sure they know it wasn't just about curing the plague. It was about stopping what's coming next. Yalora's heart ached, but she nodded again. I promise. A galaxy-wide revelation. With the saboteur in custody, Yalora presented the evidence of the plague's origins to the Council. The truth was devastating. The plague had been engineered by a coalition of rogue interstellar factions seeking to destabilize vulnerable worlds. Vela was their first target, but it wouldn't be the last. The Council was horrified. Tavak addressed the chamber, his voice heavy. This is not just an attack on Vela. It is an attack on all who value life and freedom. We must warn the galaxy and prepare for what is to come. Drekken, for all his bluster, was silent. The weight of his actions, and his complicity in nearly derailing their survival, hung over him like a shadow. A broadcast was sent across the galaxy, revealing the origins of the plague and the role of the human who had saved them. Ethan's face, pale but resolute, appeared on screens across countless worlds as Yalora narrated the story of his sacrifice. The final serum. As the lab rushed to complete the last batch of serum needed to eradicate the plague, Ethan's condition worsened. Yalora worked frantically, refusing to leave his side. She modified the retrovirus, hoping to reverse its effects and stabilize him. The final injection was a desperate gamble. Yalora administered it herself, her hands trembling. Ethan's body convulsed, his vitals dropping dangerously low. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed like he was gone. Then, slowly, his breathing steadied. His vitals improved, and his eyes fluttered open. Did it work? He asked weakly. Yalora laughed through her tears. You're not allowed to die yet, Ethan. We still need you. The resolution. The aftermath of the plague's eradication rippled through the galaxy like a shockwave. On Vela, the streets once again bustled with life as the once dying population reclaimed their cities. Ethan's serum had saved millions, and his name was now spoken with reverence across the planet. But for Ethan himself, the fight was far from over. Lying in a recovery chamber, Ethan stared at the ceiling, his body still weak from the retrovirus that had both saved the Valens and nearly killed him. The hum of the medical monitors was a constant reminder of how close he had come to death. Beside him, Yalora sat with her datapad, monitoring his vitals and fine-tuning the retrovirus treatment. You've done enough, Ethan, Yalora said softly, glancing at him. Rest now. The Valens owe you their lives. Ethan smiled faintly, his voice hoarse but steady. Saving lives isn't enough, Yalora. We need to make sure this never happens again. Galactic ripples. The broadcast revealing the plague's origins had sent shockwaves across the galaxy. Empires, alliances, and independent colonies all demanded answers. Who had created the plague? Why had the Valens been targeted? And most importantly, who would be next? The Valen Council, once fractured by fear and infighting, now stood united under Elder Tavak's leadership. They reached out to the Galactic Assembly, a loose coalition of species dedicated to maintaining peace, and presented the evidence Ethan and Yalora had uncovered. In a grand assembly hall orbiting a distant star, delegates from hundreds of species gathered to discuss the revelations. Holographic projections displayed the plague's genetic design and its undeniable artificial origins. Tavak stood before the assembly, flanked by Yalora and a visibly frail Ethan, who had insisted on attending. This plague was not a natural disaster, Tavak declared, his voice echoing through the hall. It was a weapon, a deliberate act of genocide. And if it could happen to us, it could happen to any of you. The room erupted into chaos. Delegates argued, pointing fingers and accusing one another of conspiracy. Ethan raised a hand, his voice cutting through the noise. Enough. The room fell silent. Ethan's presence, despite his weakened state, commanded respect. "We don't need more division," he said. "We need unity. The ones who created this plague want us to fight each other. That's how they win. But if we stand together, we can stop them." His words resonated, and for the first time in years, the assembly found common ground. A task force was established to investigate the rogue factions behind the plague, with Vela leading the charge. A bitter farewell. Back on Vela, Ethan prepared to leave. Though his work was far from done, he knew the planet was in good hands. Yalora and Tavak had proven themselves capable leaders, and the Valen people were rebuilding with newfound strength and purpose. As he packed his belongings in the lab that had become his second home, Yalora entered, her expression unreadable. "You're really leaving?" she asked. Ethan nodded, his movements slow but deliberate. "There's more work to do. The galaxy needs to know who's behind this, and I need to make sure they're stopped." Yalora hesitated, then stepped closer. "You don't have to do it alone, Ethan. Stay here. We can work together, build something stronger." Ethan smiled, a mixture of gratitude and sadness in his eyes. This isn't just about Vela anymore. If we don't act, this could happen to 100 other worlds. "You're needed here, Yalora. And I need to keep moving." She nodded reluctantly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then promise me you'll be careful." "I promise," Ethan said, though they both knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. The plague's creators. Ethan's journey took him to the fringes of known space, where the lines between legitimate governments and rogue factions blurred. Using the data recovered from the destroyed lab, he tracked the plague's creators to a secret facility hidden within an asteroid field. What he found was both horrifying and enlightening. The facility was a sprawling network of laboratories, where scientists of various species worked under the command of a shadowy organization known as the Concordance. Their goal was clear: to develop biological weapons capable of wiping out entire populations. Ethan infiltrated the facility, using his wits and limited strength to evade detection. He accessed the mainframe, downloading critical information about the Concordance's operations. But as he prepared to leave, an alarm blared. The facility's guards, a mix of mercenaries and genetically enhanced soldiers, descended upon him. Ethan fought valiantly, using the environment to his advantage, but he was outnumbered. Just as he was cornered, a squad of Valen soldiers, led by Yalora herself, burst onto the scene. She had followed the breadcrumbs he'd left behind, knowing he would need help. "I told you not to do this alone," she said, a smirk playing on her lips as she helped him to his feet. Together, they dismantled the facility, capturing key Concordance operatives and securing evidence that would expose their plans to the galaxy. A new beginning. With the Concordance's network dismantled and their leaders in custody, the galaxy breathed a collective sigh of relief. The Galactic Assembly, spurred by the courage and sacrifices of Ethan and the Valens, passed sweeping reforms to prevent the creation and use of biological weapons. On Vela, Ethan was hailed as a hero, not just for saving their planet, but for inspiring the galaxy to unite against a common threat. Statues were erected in his honor, and his name became a symbol of resilience and hope. But for Ethan, the accolades meant little. He returned to his work, not as a savior, but as a doctor, a human who had simply refused to give up.